a fundamental shift in the way that America was beginning to define itself.
Discrimination against African Americans in public spaces has a long history. In the 1960s, black and white students trying to desegregate buses were firebombed.
Social inequalities for African Americans and Native Americans in the United States have inevitably evolved to the extent that the effects of discrimination are much less prevalent today than in the 1700s. Time goes to show the developments of movements, laws, and wars have had a heavy impact on racial groups. In our history, specifically the Indian Removal Act, Civil Rights Movement, Declaration of Independence, and the Night Walker by Brett Staples demonstrated the inequalities between races in the United States as it progressed over time.
Thinking of the day becomes more racist, that the Cherokees are inferior and cannot be like the whites.
The Indian Removal Act was established in 1830 and forced about 46,000 Native Americans to relocate against their will and their desire. This later became known as the Trail of Tears, because an estimated 4,000 of them died along the way. This was a blatant disrespect to the Native Americans, their beliefs, and their cultural and emotional ties to their homeland. Given this fact, it demonstrates the lack of regard we had for the people of varying ethnicities in America and the amount of reform that needed to be made to help this specific population at this point in our history. Because the American Indians began to rebel against discriminatory acts made against them, we had to progress as a nation to incorporate their demands and enact reform. Over time, progress has been made, so now the Native Americans' rights and land reserves are protected and they are able to maintain their culturally rich communities. For example, affluent casinos and the public's ability to visit these reserves without jeopardizing the quality of the reserves.
In the Declaration of Independence, it states that all men are created equal. But in early America, blacks and Native Americans were very much not included in this statement. However, as time went on, blacks and Native Americans started to gain more equality, including the right to vote, own land, and get a fair education. Along with this, they also began to break into the sports and economic industries, competing with and surpassing white people.
People like Jackie Robinson, Willie Mays, Tiger Woods, and Serena Williams are examples of African Americans excelling in the sports industry and inspiring the younger generation to let nothing hold them back. These people, along with many others, have helped society progress and see that race is not a weakness or something to be ashamed of, but a strength.
The Night Walker by Brent Staples is a perfect example of black stereotyping in America. Staples uses his own personal experiences and emotions to portray the difficulties of being an African American male in a predominantly white field of work. Staples, who struggles with insomnia, the difficulty of falling or staying asleep, copes with his problems by going on nighttime walks. While living in an area that has a record of black violence, Staples is continuously looked at as a threat to the people around him because of the color of his skin. During his night walks, many people, women in particular, struggle to handle Staples' presence, as they find being around him uncomfortable. People will walk quickly to avoid any communication, conflict, and contact. For Staples, the actions done by other people have a huge impact as he feels that he has to change his actions while being in public. This novel goes to show how many other black people are faced with the same exact situation, and that to this day, racism is still occurring. Although it is not as bad as it was back then, blacks are still facing discrimination. Staples shows how back in the 1900s, blacks struggled with feeling comfortable in their own skin. Being able to express themselves and not be judged was not an easy task, as they faced many consequences. Although today not all African Americans are accepted by their communities, blacks are now able to express themselves freely and feel confident in embracing their differences. Society is more understanding today than it has ever been of people being different. For example, the celebration of Black History Month, which celebrates Black heritage, culture, and the important figures who have fought for the rights they have today, such as Martin Luther King Jr. and Rosa Parks. For
years now, the U.S. has ensured the access of health care for the Native Americans, and in return, portions of land would be exchanged. Recently, Trump's administration's desire to break the government's promise towards the Indians has caused anger and confusion among them. President Trump stated that in order to keep their health care, the natives would have to get a job. Tribe leaders believe that this policy will threaten access to care going back to old times. Even though the Native Americans' health care is being threatened and some African Americans are still living in poverty, many advances have been made over the past 20 years. For example, the Native Americans have had more respect for their culture, which is demonstrated by their resistance to Trump's administration. We also recently had America's first African American president, Barack Obama, that served for 8 years.
It is clear that since the 1700s, social inequalities for the African Americans and the Native Americans have inevitably progressed, reducing the amount of discrimination they face compared to the colonial period.
Through acts that have been passed and movements that were made, races that were once looked down upon have developed, resulting in equal opportunities along with rights.
Now when the saints go marching in,